Yeah, morning, Year 9 girls. I thought I'd give you a quick run through of the main causes of World War One. Now, obviously, this was one of the little tasks that I set you up for the PowerPoint, and I might run into the point where we talk about the assassination at the start of the World War in 1914, just towards the end of this, but I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to do it without it being a live lesson, but still being very much concentrating on the topic and the content. So I'll try to keep it quite short. The main reasons, of course, are the military, alliances, imperialism and nationalism. So we'll start with military and militarism. So that's all about building up your army or your navy. Of course, there wasn't an air force back in the day because they didn't have any aeroplanes at the time. But certainly the armies and the navies were something that the countries of Europe in particular were big on. So Russia had the biggest army and because it was the biggest country. Britain had the biggest navy because it had an empire all over the world. Germany was very envious or jealous of that empire, so they were starting to build up their navy as well at the same time. And you see, way back in the 1800s, the countries hadn't generally gone to war because for the most part, the leaders of the countries, the kings or the queens or the princes or the princesses, tended to be related to each other. So because the king of Germany was related to the king of England, they were cousins, there was always this assumption that we're not going to go to war with our cousin. How could we possibly do that? And the same kind of deal applied to the French and to the Russians. So war had been avoided because of marriages between these big royal families, and the royal families of Europe were kind of just like one big inbred family, I suppose you might say. So this big inbred family had prevented wars from happening until 1914, when the alliances, the A in our name, starts happening. So the alliances system had meant that Germany had become friends with Austria-Hungary. They both spoke German, and then Italy had tagged into that. So you had right through this kind of spine through the centre of Europe of those three big countries. And then the other alliance, which was called the Entente, the Entente, it's spelled as, is a French word for an understanding, was the French and the Russians. So think of the French and the Russians on either side of that spine to keep the spine from expanding. So to stop the expansion of the Austrians and the Germans and those countries that way, the alliance of France and Russia sort of boxed them into the system. And then Britain tagged onto that one to make it 3-3. So it's the Britain, the French and the Russians versus the Germans, the Italians and the Austrian-Hungaries. That was the two alliance system that we're talking about. So that moves on to imperialism. And in a nutshell, the British had the empire, which is all those countries all around the world. And as I said, in a nutshell, Germany was jealous because the two biggest countries in all of this are Britain and Germany. Germany had a very, very strong, industrial revolution, and the economy was doing good, but they didn't have any countries overseas that they could send their stuff to. And that's what they looked at Britain and thought, oh, do you know what? Britain's in a great place because they have good industry and they have places that they can send the stuff that they make to. So Germany was envious of Britain's empire. So imperialism is your third one. And lastly is this sense of nationalism, the idea that people in all of the countries, be it Britain or France or Germany or Austria or Russia or Italy, wherever they were becoming increasingly patriotic. And when you go more than patriotic, which is kind of like bigging up your country in a sports game, but then when you start to think that your country is better than everybody else, that your country is superior to other countries, you get a sense of the N word, which is nationalism. So nationalism tips these countries into this conflict with each other, that they want to be recognized for themselves. So that's when in 1914 when we see the Archduke and his wife go to visit a town, Sarajevo, in Europe, and Sarajevo is this town that is part of Austria-Hungary, but a lot of the people that live there want to be part of another country called Serbia. And Serbia was friends with Russia, which was friends with France and Britain, and Austria was friends with Germany and Italy. So when the assassination takes place of the leader, the guy who's going to be the king, that's a massive, massive shock. So the reaction sees all those countries that are in alliances like sort of dominoes. God, it's a TikTok, isn't it? Into war. They topple like dominoes, and they follow their alliances and they follow their systems, and suddenly from being a continent that's at peace with each other, a world that's at peace, what you then have, bosh, is the start of a war that nobody really wanted, but nobody really wanted to stop either. And it's a really, really tragic war, World War One, because there was no real need for it. If they could have just sat around a big table, had a bit of a yarn, had a bit of a chat, and said, look, we need to make a few changes and do a few things, and we'll get it sorted. But they didn't, they failed, and that's basically the tragedy of the start of World War One. So when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, when they go to visit Sarajevo, half of the town welcomes them and half of the town hates them. And then an assassin decides he's going to go pop, I'm going to see you, and that execution or assassination leads the other countries to conveniently have a war with each other, and the result 4 years later is 10 million people dead and the assassin still alive. All right, as promised, that was the run through the causes of the war to the point where the war actually starts, and next week you'll be doing a little bit more about the war itself. All right, hope you enjoyed that, hope it made sense, and I hope it was a bit better than the live lesson, because I know it's not easy for any of us in the live lesson. So you can rewind and watch this again. Oh, and this bite, I got stung on the bite the other day. Anyway, it's bad, isn't it? All right, I'll see you, bye.